post-concert feedback, a total of 96 audience members completed exit questionnaires capturing the immediate reaction and impact of the concert. Respondents were asked to share their initial thoughts upon hearing about a deaf music event featuring deaf musicians, how the concert made them feel, key messages that they would take away from the event, and whether they had learned anything new. 74 of the respondents identified themselves as hearing, 8 identified themselves as other, 8 identified themselves as deaf, and 6 identified themselves as hard of hearing. The majority of attendees were Barbadian nationals, but respondents also included people from the UK, Canada, and Germany. Respondents were asked to provide feedback on the following prompts. What brings you here today? When you first heard about this event, a deaf music event featuring deaf musicians and members of the deaf community, what were your thoughts? What is one key message you will take away with you this evening? Did you learn anything new? How did the concert make you feel? Recommendations. The research presented throughout this report suggests that while there is remarkable resilience within the deaf community, there is also huge scope for improvement in wider society in terms of advancing the meaningful participation, inclusion, and progression of deaf people in Barbados. The recommendations based on the research conducted are presented below. Empowering parents and families of deaf children through education, workshops, signposting to support services, and information packs. One major factor which impacted on the outcomes, and more importantly, the mindset of the deaf community members interviewed here, was parental attitudes and support. Parents are pivotal in shaping the self-belief, confidence, and expectations that individuals hold for themselves. Against a backdrop of societal stigma and misconceptions around deafness, it is imperative that parents of deaf children are empowered with the correct knowledge, awareness, and understanding of what it means to be deaf. Equipped with the know-how and tools to communicate with and for their children, they will be far better placed to advocate for deaf rights. Advocate for appropriate health care and specialist support. Advocate for the same quality of education they would expect a hearing child to receive. Advocate for the achievement of their child's full academic potential. Advocate for qualifications and training opportunities. And advocate for fair and paid employment such that their children can lead meaningful and independent lives filled with purpose and opportunities to develop and utilize their inherent skills and talents. Specifically, the first recommendation based on the research conducted here concerns running workshops with parents and families of deaf children, signposting to available support services, and providing families of deaf children with information packs, particularly important when a child is first identified as deaf. Parents can be empowered through education about what it means to be deaf. Workshops would focus on the importance of newborn screening and early detection of any hearing loss to avoid delays in a child's development of language and communication. Parents should be educated on the choices and support available to them. Choices around language and communication, assisted technologies, hearing aids and implants, and information on how they can support their child's development and communication at home through the use of visual communication, pictures, and face-to-face interaction. In the context of Barbados, workshops would benefit from focusing on dismantling some of the shame and stigma around deafness. Parental support that normalizes feelings of overwhelm and concern, and in conjunction reassures parents that with the correct support, deaf children can enjoy all the things a hearing child would. Sports, leisure, music, and as they get older, become independent, learn to drive, go to university, travel, enjoy a good career doing whatever they want, and achieve a full and meaningful life would be beneficial. Educating parents about what it means to be deaf also involves dispelling common myths and misconceptions around deafness, such as deaf people cannot work or drive, or that there is something cognitively deficient in a deaf person. The Barbados deaf community has made great efforts to teach sign language. Members of the Deaf Women's Group ran sign language classes in their own homes, and others taught a course for beginner sign language, including teaching about deaf culture, topical issues that affect deaf people, and his own experiences of growing up deaf in Barbados to students and parents at the Irving Wilson School. These were unfortunately halted when COVID-19 restrictions were put in place. Efforts like these should be fully supported and promoted. Sign language support in classes should be readily available to parents and members of the public. Parents should be educated on the necessity of visual communication, the place of American Sign Language as the recognized language for deaf people in Barbados, and the importance of communicating through sign language for deaf children and adults. Exposure to deaf role models, families of deaf children and deaf children themselves should be exposed to deaf speakers and role models, demonstrating firsthand the possibilities when the correct support and attitudes are in place and providing hard evidence that deaf can. Deaf adults should be invited into schools to run workshops with children and be involved in the education of future generations of their own community. Children should be exposed to role models who exhibit deaf pride and who can not only achieve in mainstream society, but also celebrate the nuances of their own distinct culture and language. Parent workshops could invite deaf role models to share their life stories, their accomplishments and achievements, and any words of encouragement or advice. International speakers can provide huge value here in shedding light, fresh perspectives, and new ways of seeing. Barbados also has a role to play in including the deaf community as part of its wider cultural heritage. Access to quality education. The interviews conducted here suggest that there is huge scope for improving the education of deaf children in Barbados. The school environment is a primary influence on not only the educational outcomes of children, but also on how they feel about themselves, their futures, and the wider world. The general apathy towards deaf education in Barbados could be addressed by selecting teachers that have the specialist skills and that express a desire to want to work in special educational needs. At present, it seems that teachers are often placed in the Irving Wilson School. Although well-intentioned, they may not have the skills, passion, drive, or understanding that working with SEND children is a privilege, and one that reaps huge rewards. The culture of a school emanates from its leadership, from its principal, who should be placed not only on the basis of their aptitude to understand and work sensitively with SEND children, but also on their ability to respect, celebrate, and take pride in the achievements of students within their school. Something notably absent at the Irving Wilson School for the Deaf. Sandra David, teacher of the deaf for over 30 years, visited Irving Wilson School in 2022 and provided a detailed list of recommendations. Her suggestions to improve the provision of deaf education included seating children in a semicircle so that they could communicate more fluidly, broadening the scope of subjects covered, matching tasks to students' cognitive abilities, contextualizing learning, breaking down bigger learning concepts over several lessons, including more independent learning, assessment of children's understanding, and the delivery of SMART lesson objectives and outcomes. Sandra concluded that deaf children's outcomes could be improved by forging stronger links between the different organizations that work to promote the lives of deaf children. Providing teachers with the opportunity to participate in Teacher of the Deaf training and employing deaf adults as teaching assistants that work in partnership with teachers, educational qualifications, training, routine monitoring of educational outcomes, and accountability for the education of deaf and SEND children. Deaf adults reported routinely being denied the opportunity to sit CXC examinations or obtain any formal educational qualifications during their time at the Irving Wilson School. This massively impeded their progress and ability to enter either further education, training, or employment. There appears to be no routine monitoring of the progress or educational outcomes of deaf students. This strongly speaks to the apathy towards and total disregard of their academic potential. While this may be the protocol on paper, no testing of educational progress appears to happen. No data on the educational outcomes of children who attend the Irving Wilson School appears to exist. And none of the deaf adults interviewed here obtained any qualifications while at the Irving Wilson School. Deaf students, like any other students, should be schooled towards the attainment of educational qualifications. They should be allowed access to sit exams and be supported to achieve their full academic potential. Their educational learning and progress should be tested and monitored, and outcomes should be reported to the Ministry of Education, thus reflecting the performance and efficacy of the school. More recent initiatives, such as the Duke of Edinburgh International Award, in collaboration with the Deaf Heart Project, funded by the Maria Holder Memorial Trust, offer positive steps towards providing more equal opportunities for deaf and other disadvantaged students. Paid employment, promoting and protecting deaf rights, increasing awareness and opportunities for paid deaf employment through training schemes, work placements, and apprenticeships. The interviews conducted here revealed very low expectations, discrimination, and inequality in the workplace. Schemes that were set up by the Deaf School for the Deaf Adults interviewed here related to short-term placements in low-skilled positions that were typically unpaid. The lack of educational and training qualifications left deaf adults vulnerable and dependent as they struggled to secure paid work placements. Employers also lack awareness of what deaf employees could achieve given the opportunity. More progressive workplace approaches and attitudes that allowed for employment opportunities demonstrated how successfully these can work. Deaf people shone brightly in the workplace when given the chance. One member of the deaf community described her time working at the Hilton Hotel, how she was accommodated with relative ease by her colleagues, treated fairly, valued, and how hard she worked as a result. Employers would benefit from increased awareness around support for deaf employees and providing opportunities for the deaf. Critically, they should not be able to discriminate against an individual because on their deafness. This equates to equality, fair treatment, and equal rights in the workplace. Deaf leadership, because the employment prospects are so poor for the deaf in Barbados, they have developed remarkable ingenuity and creativity with regards to generating incomes through their own business enterprises. What they need are opportunities to acquire business and leadership skills in order to develop their ideas and talents such that they can take their own businesses forward. Amongst the deaf community members interviewed here were bakers, chiefs, photographers, arts, crafts, and jewelry businesses, aspiring life coaches, and accountants, to name a few. What they were lacking was funding and opportunities to grow their businesses. Government support and financial backing, links to mentors, networks, and schemes where local businesses could invest in deaf-led startups would all be beneficial. Above all, members of the deaf community need to be given opportunities to step into not only mainstream, but leadership spaces, particularly spaces where the decisions made impact them. Once in those spaces, they need to be empowered with the appropriate support, skills, and recognition such that they can really flourish. Creative, musical, and artistic opportunities. Deaf children were given the opportunity to engage in signing to songs at the Irving Wilson School, but otherwise, access to music education was lacking. Deaf children and adults would really benefit from more opportunities to engage in creative, musical, and artistic pursuits. The research conducted here suggests that at present, many members of the deaf community enjoy music and the arts, and use their creative talents to forge an income. But these are not discovered, nurtured, or supported in an education system or through training. They pursue this outside of the education system, setting up businesses and pursuing their creative talents with little to no support. Decibels International work to promote opportunities where all people, including people with disabilities, can develop their creativity and unlock their abilities. Barbados would benefit from projects which seek to do similar. Cultural participation of deaf people and people with disabilities. Worldwide, there is increasing attention on the cultural participation of people with disabilities. Participation in cultural life increases the inclusion of marginalized people in society, helps challenge negative stereotypes, raise awareness, and promote quality of life. Tadek argues that participation in culture is one of the essential dimensions of life, both for persons with disabilities and for those without. The UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities highlights the need for appropriate measures to ensure that persons with disabilities enjoy access to cultural materials in accessible formats. It also states that persons with disabilities shall be entitled, on an equal basis with others, to recognition and support of their specific cultural and linguistic identity, including sign languages and deaf culture. One of the recommendations following this report is to work in partnership with the National Cultural Foundation and the Barbados Council for the Disabled to raise awareness about the importance of cultural access and participation of people with disabilities, but also support members of the deaf community as creators of Barbadian culture. Mental health and well-being support. The members of the deaf community interviewed here reported a sense of isolation, loneliness, and boredom. Many of them stayed at home all day, watching TV and doing little else. Unemployed and marginalized, they lacked independence, but also the sense of belonging and meaning and purpose that often accompanies employment and inclusion in civic life. Feelings of sadness, depression, and generally being unimportant were reported. Several of the interviewees became emotional as they described the monotony of their day-to-day lives. The focus groups and discussions with family members and relevant others all suggested that poor mental health was a problem for the deaf. Access to mental health support services would be highly beneficial for the deaf community. These would need to be provided by trained mental health professionals proficient in American Sign Language. This type of support could potentially be sourced internationally and delivered online through partnerships with specialist organizations that provide mental health support for deaf and disabled persons and the Barbados Council for the Disabled. Greater involvement, interaction, and contact between deaf and hearing worlds and public awareness campaigns that promote equality, acceptance, and alliance. More opportunities for contact between deaf and hearing worlds would be hugely beneficial not only for the deaf community, but also for the wider public. Contact and interaction promote understanding and awareness and help to dispel negative stereotypes and misconceptions. Given that societal attitudes towards the deaf community were one of the biggest factors that negatively impacted on the lives of the deaf community members interviewed here, public awareness campaigns focused on equality, acceptance, and alliance would improve the quality of life for deaf Barbadian citizens. A base, or a place the deaf community can call home. There is a sense that spaces once designated for deaf children and people have been eroded and not replaced. For example, the Irving Wilson School, once called the Irving Wilson School for the Deaf, is now focusing its attention on the education of autistic children and expanding its provision in that direction. Members of the deaf community utilize the space at BCD, but so do many other groups and committees. What is really needed is a specialized location set up specifically as a base, hub, and home for members of the deaf community to congregate, connect, and take pride in their culture. The deaf community need a physical, tangible location to represent them. Concluding comments. The overall aim of the Calypso project was to significantly improve the lives of Barbadian deaf people. Calypso is a project which uses music as a tool to educate and empower by raising awareness and understanding about the deaf community and the general population, providing a platform to give deaf people a voice, and enabling the development of mutually supportive relationships between deaf and hearing worlds across family networks, local businesses, arts, education, health, and social care. The research gathered for this report suggested that there are three main ways through which this overarching aim of improving the lives of Barbadian deaf people can be progressed through increased equality. Specifically, equality can be promoted by increasing awareness, understanding, and by dismantling the barriers that currently oppress and disadvantage deaf people in Barbados. It requires increasing access. Access to quality education, qualifications and opportunities, access to business, employment and training, access to newborn screening, specialist health care, and support services, access to culture, community, creativity, art, and music, access to role models, change makers, and innovators, access to fair treatment and the protection of human rights. It requires inclusion, including deaf people as leaders, leaders in education, leaders in culture, art and music, leaders in business. It requires including deaf people in decisions that affect them, providing deaf people a voice, and including them as valued citizens of Barbados.